Hello everyone, welcome to Hayes Secret Tales. Please enjoy this video.
The mahogany door slams shut behind Adrian as he faces his father across the massive desk. Richard Whitmore's face flushes crimson. If you walk away from Harvard, from the company, I will cut you off completely. No trust fund, no safety net, nothing. Adrian's hands shake, but his voice stays steady. Then I guess I'll have to learn to live without it. 24 years of expectations, billions in inheritance, a carefully constructed future, all of it crumbling as Adrian chooses the massive gardener waiting outside over everything his father built. Richard stands, his controlled facade finally cracking. You're throwing away your birthright for what? Some man who works with his hands? Adrian meets his father's eyes and speaks the truth. That will change everything. I'm throwing it away for someone who sees me, really sees me. And that's worth more than all your money. He walks out before his father can respond, his heart pounding, knowing Dominic Hayes is the only future he wants, even if it costs him everything else. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. The Bentley's tires crunched on the gravel drive as Adrian Whitmore returned to the estate he'd spent his entire life trying to escape. 24 years old and already a failure by his father's standards. Dropped out of Harvard Business School after 2 semesters. Couldn't handle the pressure. Couldn't live up to the Whitmore name. Couldn't become the heir apparent to a tech empire worth $3 billion. The shame sat heavy in his chest as the mansion came into view. 40,000 square feet of glass and stone perched on 20 acres of manicured perfection. His father had built this monument to success, and Adrian had been raised inside it like a prince in a tower, isolated from anything real or honest or true. The driver opened his door, and Adrian stepped out into the late afternoon heat. June in Connecticut meant humidity that clung to skin and made dress shirts stick to backs. He pulled at his collar, already feeling suffocated by the weight of returning home. His mother would be disappointed in that quiet, cutting way she had perfected. His father would be furious, though he'd never raise his voice. Control was everything to Richard Whitmore. Losing control meant weakness. Adrian grabbed his bags from the trunk and dismissed the driver with a nod. He could at least carry his own failure into the house. The front door opened before he reached it. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who'd been with the family since before Adrian was born, stood in the doorway with an expression that managed to convey both sympathy and reproach. Your father is in his study. He wants to see you immediately. Of course he does. Adrian set his bags in the foyer. The marble floors gleamed, reflecting the massive chandelier overhead. Everything in this house was polished, perfect, expensive. Everything except him. He walked through hallways lined with modern art his mother collected and his father never looked at. The study door was open. Richard Whitmore sat behind his desk, silver hair perfectly styled, suit jacket still on despite the late hour. He didn't look up when Adrian entered. Sit down. Adrian sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. His father continued typing on his laptop for a full minute before finally meeting his eyes. The disappointment was clear, even though Richard's expression remained neutral. Harvard called 3 weeks ago. You didn't think to inform us yourself? I needed time to figure out what to say. What is there to say? You quit. You gave up the opportunity most people would kill for because it was too hard. Richard's voice was cold, measured. This is what I've spent 24 years preparing you for. The business needs fresh leadership. You were supposed to be that leadership. I'm not you. The words came out sharper than Adrian intended. I've never wanted this, any of this. His father's jaw tightened. What you want is irrelevant. You have responsibilities, obligations. The Whitmore name means something. To you, not to me. The silence that followed was crushing. Adrian watched emotions flicker across his father's face. Anger, disappointment, something that might have been pain if Richard Whitmore were capable of such vulnerability. You'll stay here for the summer, work on the estate, learn what real work looks like, since clearly sitting in classrooms is beyond your capabilities. His father returned his attention to the laptop. We'll discuss your future in the fall. Until then, you're not to touch your trust fund. You'll earn a salary like any other employee. Dismissed. Adrian stood on shaking legs and walked out. The humiliation burned through him. 24 years old and being treated like a child who needed punishment. But what had he expected? Understanding? Compassion? Those weren't currencies his father traded in. He climbed the stairs to his old bedroom. Nothing had changed. Same furniture, same view of the gardens stretching out below. Same sense of being trapped in a life that had never fit right. He stripped off his dress shirt and fell onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. This was supposed to be temporary, a summer of penance. Then he'd figure out what came next. Maybe travel, maybe find work that meant something, maybe finally live without the weight of expectations crushing him. Tomorrow he'd meet with Morrison, the estate manager, and find out what work his father had planned, probably something humiliating, menial, designed to teach him a lesson about privilege and entitlement. Adrian closed his eyes and tried not to think about the fact that he had no idea who he was outside of being Richard Whitmore's disappointing son. Morning came too early. Adrian dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, clothes he rarely wore, and made his way to the kitchen. Mrs. Chen had breakfast waiting. She didn't comment on his situation, just poured him coffee and set a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. Mr. Morrison is expecting you at the equipment barn at 7. You have 20 minutes. Adrian ate quickly, drank the coffee black, and headed out through the back terrace. The estate sprawled in every direction. Tennis courts, a pool, formal gardens, wooded paths, greenhouses. An army of staff maintained it all. Gardeners, groundskeepers, maintenance workers. People Adrian had seen his entire life but never really noticed. They were background, like the furniture or the art. The equipment barn sat at the far edge of the property, a large metal structure where machinery and tools were stored. Morrison stood outside, clipboard in hand. He was a neat, efficient man in his 50s who'd managed the estate for a decade. Mr. Whitmore. Morrison's tone was professional, neutral. He gestured toward the barn. Your father has assigned you to the grounds crew for the summer. You'll work 6 days a week, 8 to 5. Your supervisor will be Dominic Hayes, the head gardener. He'll explain your duties. Adrian nodded, fighting the urge to argue. This was his reality now. Morrison checked his watch. Hayes should be here any moment. He starts at 7 sharp. As if summoned, a truck appeared on the access road, kicking up dust as it approached. It was an old F-25, dark green, with tools and equipment visible in the bed. The truck pulled up beside the barn, and the driver's door opened. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. The man who stepped out was massive, 6'8" at least, with shoulders that seemed too broad to be real. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to take up space. Black skin gleamed in the morning sun, muscles shifting under a gray t-shirt that was damp with sweat despite the early hour. Work boots that had seen years of use, hands that looked like they could break stone. But it was his face that made Adrian's stomach clench. Strong jaw, dark eyes that assessed everything, an expression that radiated authority without effort. This was a man who commanded respect simply by existing. Everything about him was the opposite of Richard Whitmore's polished corporate power. This was raw, physical, undeniable. Hayes. Morrison's voice snapped Adrian back to awareness. This is Adrian Whitmore. He'll be working under your supervision this summer. The big man's eyes moved to Adrian, and the weight of that gaze felt like a physical thing. He didn't smile, didn't offer a hand to shake, just studied Adrian with an intensity that made him want to look away. Adrian forced himself to hold eye contact, some stubborn part of him refusing to show weakness. You ever done manual labor before? Dominic's voice was deep, rough around the edges, with an accent that suggested southern roots. No. You know anything about gardening, landscaping, operating machinery? No. Dominic turned to Morrison. You're giving me a rich kid who's never worked a day in his life. Those are your instructions. Morrison handed Dominic a folder. His schedule, emergency contacts, medical information. He works for you, reports to you, takes orders from you. Any problems, you let me know. Dominic took the folder without opening it. Fine. Morrison nodded and left, heading back toward the main house in his golf cart. Adrian stood alone with the massive gardener, feeling suddenly very small and very unprepared. Get in the truck. Dominic walked around to the driver's side. Adrian climbed into the passenger seat. The interior smelled like dirt and coffee and something else, something masculine and earthy that made his pulse quicken in ways he didn't want to examine. Dominic started the engine and drove deeper into the estate, taking a service road that wound through wooded areas Adrian had never explored. Your father thinks I'm going to teach you about honest work. Dominic's eyes stayed on the road. Thinks a summer getting your hands dirty will straighten you out. Make a man of you. Adrian's jaw tightened. I didn't ask for this. I know what you asked for. Dominic glanced at him, and there was something knowing in that look. Something that made Adrian's skin prickle with awareness. You asked to escape. To run away from expectations you can't meet. But running doesn't work. Trust me. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you. Dominic pulled the truck to a stop near a greenhouse. I know you're scared. I know you've spent your whole life pretending to be someone you're not. I know you've got needs you've never admitted to anyone, including yourself. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. That's not. Don't lie to me. Dominic turned in his seat, and the small space of the truck cab suddenly felt suffocating. I've been watching you since you were 16. Summers when you'd come home from boarding school, wandering around the estate like a ghost. I saw you, really saw you, and I know what you need, even if you don't. The air between them crackled with something Adrian couldn't name, fear and attraction and a desperate, aching curiosity. Dominic's eyes held his, and Adrian couldn't look away, couldn't move, could barely breathe. This summer, you're going to learn more than gardening. Dominic's voice dropped lower. You're going to learn who you really are, what you're really capable of. And I'm going to be the one to teach you. Before Adrian could respond, Dominic was out of the truck, walking toward the greenhouse with long, purposeful strides. Adrian sat frozen for a moment, his mind spinning. What had just happened? What had Dominic meant? And why did his body respond with heat and need instead of outrage? He forced himself out of the truck and followed. The greenhouse was massive, filled with plants in various stages of growth. The air inside was humid, thick, harder to breathe. Dominic was already moving between rows, checking soil, adjusting irrigation lines, his massive frame somehow graceful among the delicate plants. We're transplanting today. Dominic gestured to a stack of empty pots. These seedlings need to be moved into larger containers. I'll show you how to do it once. After that, you work on your own. You break a plant. You start over. You waste soil. You clean it up. You don't follow instructions. You face consequences. What kind of consequences? Dominic's smile was dark, promising. The kind you'll remember. He demonstrated the process, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted a seedling, prepared the new pot, nestled the roots into fresh soil. Adrian watched, trying to focus on the technique, but his attention kept drifting to the way Dominic moved, the flex of muscles under thin fabric, the casual power in every gesture. "Your turn." Adrian took a seedling and mimicked what he'd seen. His hands were clumsy, unpracticed. Soil spilled across the work table. The plant's roots tangled. He could feel Dominic watching him, could sense disapproval radiating from the big man. "Stop." Dominic moved behind him, close enough that Adrian could feel body heat. "You're forcing it. Plants are living things. They need care, not violence." He reached around Adrian, his massive arms caging the smaller man against the work table. His hands covered Adrian's, guiding them through the motion. The touch sent electricity racing up Adrian's arms, down his spine, settling low in his belly, as heat that had nothing to do with the greenhouse temperature. Gentle. Dominic's voice was right against Adrian's ear. "Feel how the roots want to spread. Don't fight them, work with them." Adrian could barely concentrate on the plant. All his awareness centered on the solid wall of muscle pressed against his back, the rough texture of calloused palms against his softer hands, the scent of sweat and earth and masculine presence overwhelming his senses. There. Dominic stepped back, leaving Adrian swaying slightly without the support. "That's how it's done. Now do it again. 50 more pots by lunch." Adrian spent the next 4 hours transplanting seedlings while Dominic worked on other projects nearby. His back ached from bending over the table, his hands cramped. Soil worked its way under his fingernails and into every crease of his skin. The heat and humidity made his shirt stick to his back, and sweat dripped into his eyes. But every time he thought about complaining, he'd glance over and see Dominic hauling 50-pound bags of mulch like they weighed nothing, or digging trenches for new irrigation lines, working with an intensity that made Adrian's own discomfort seem trivial. When Dominic finally called lunch, Adrian had completed 37 pots. His shoulders screamed, and his hands trembled with fatigue. 20 short. Dominic examined the completed work, checking each plant, but the quality is acceptable. For a first attempt, it felt like high praise from this man who seemed incapable of softness. They ate lunch in silence, sitting on the tailgate of Dominic's truck in the shade of an oak tree. Mrs. Chen had packed sandwiches and fruit for Adrian. Dominic produced his own lunch from a cooler. They didn't speak, but the quiet felt charged, heavy with things unsaid. After lunch, Dominic assigned Adrian to weeding the rose garden near the main house. Acres of carefully tended beds that required constant maintenance. He demonstrated the difference between weeds and intentional ground cover, showed Adrian the proper way to remove roots without disturbing desired plants, then left him to it. Adrian worked on his knees in the dirt, pulling weeds under the brutal afternoon sun. His designer jeans were ruined within an hour. His hands blistered where soft skin met rough stems. Everything hurt, and he'd only completed half of one bed when Dominic reappeared. "How much more time do I have?" "None." Dominic's expression was unreadable. "Workday's over, but I didn't finish. You'll finish tomorrow, and the day after. This isn't a sprint, it's endurance." Adrian struggled to his feet, his knees protesting. He must have looked as exhausted as he felt because something flickered across Dominic's face. Not quite sympathy, but acknowledgement. "First day is always the hardest. Your body will adapt. How long have you been doing this?" 20 years. Started as a day laborer when I was 16. Worked my way up to crew chief, then head gardener. Your father hired me 8 years ago. 20 years. Adrian tried to imagine spending 2 decades doing physical labor. His body already felt broken after 8 hours. "Go clean up. Tomorrow we start at 7 again." Adrian trudged back to the main house, every muscle in his body screaming. He bypassed the main entrance and used the service door, not wanting to face his father looking like he'd been dragged through dirt. Upstairs, he stripped off his filthy clothes and stood under the shower until the hot water ran cold. The mirror showed someone he barely recognized. His soft hands were torn and blistered. His pale skin was flushed with sunburn across his neck and forearms where his shirt had offered no protection. His body ached in places he hadn't known could ache. But underneath the pain, something else stirred. A strange sense of accomplishment at having survived the day. And something darker, more complicated, every time he thought about Dominic's hands on his. That deep voice in his ear, the knowing look in those dark eyes that saw straight through him. Adrian dressed and went down to dinner. His parents were dining out, thank God. He ate alone in the breakfast room, food he barely tasted, then fell into bed before sunset. Sleep claimed him instantly, and his dreams were filled with massive hands, quiet commands, and the feeling of being seen completely for the first time in his life. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. Adrian would wake sore, drag himself to the equipment barn by 7, and submit to whatever tasks Dominic assigned. Hauling mulch, trimming hedges, mowing the expansive lawns, repairing irrigation systems, pruning trees. Every day brought new physical challenges that pushed him past what he thought he could endure. But his body did adapt, just as Dominic had promised. Muscles developed in his shoulders and arms. His hands toughened, calluses forming where blisters had been. His endurance increased until a full day's work no longer left him destroyed. And through it all, Dominic remained a constant presence, instructing, correcting, occasionally praising when Adrian executed a task properly, but always watching with those dark, knowing eyes that seemed to see past Adrian's carefully constructed defenses straight to the truth underneath. The tension between them built slowly, incrementally, a hand lingering on Adrian's shoulder when correcting his form, standing too close when demonstrating a technique, Dominic's voice dropping into registers that felt intimate, personal, meant only for Adrian's ears, and Adrian responded to every touch, every look, every low command, with a hunger he'd never acknowledged before. One afternoon, in the 3rd week, they were working in the back gardens, an area not visible from the main house. Adrian was spreading fresh mulch around the base of ornamental trees, while Dominic pruned overhead branches. The heat was oppressive, humidity thick enough to choke on. Adrian had stripped off his shirt an hour ago, working in just jeans and boots, his skin slick with sweat. He heard Dominic descend the ladder, but didn't look up from his work until the big man spoke. "You're doing it wrong." Adrian straightened, wiping sweat from his eyes. "What?" "The mulch. You're piling it against the trunk." Dominic moved closer. "That will rot the bark, kill the tree. It needs space to breathe." He knelt beside Adrian, demonstrating the proper technique. His hand brushed Adrian's arm, and the contact sent familiar heat spiraling through Adrian's core. He was close enough that Adrian could see the sheen of sweat on dark skin, could smell earth and exertion, and something essentially masculine that made his mouth go dry. Like this. Dominic's large hands shaped the mulch properly. "See the difference?" "Yes." Adrian's voice came out rougher than intended. Dominic's eyes met his, and the world narrowed to just the two of them in the shade of the tree. The weight of that gaze was crushing, demanding. Adrian couldn't look away, couldn't move. "You've been working hard." Dominic's hand settled on Adrian's bare shoulder, thumb brushing against his collarbone. Bodies changing, getting stronger. The touch was fire on Adrian's skin. He should pull away, should establish boundaries, should do anything except lean into that contact like a man starving for it. But he couldn't make himself move, couldn't make himself want to. Getting tougher on the outside, Dominic's thumb traced along Adrian's collarbone, a touch that was both innocent and charged with intention. but I can still see the softness underneath. Still see the boy who doesn't know what he wants. I know what I want." The words escaped before Adrian could stop them. Dominic's eyes darkened, his hand tightening fractionally on Adrian's shoulder. "Do you? Say it then, out loud. Tell me what you want." Adrian's breath came faster, his heart hammering. He'd never said it before, never admitted it to anyone, had barely admitted it to himself during dark nights alone, when his body responded to thoughts and images that should have made him feel shame. "I want." He couldn't finish. The words stuck in his throat. "You want me." Dominic's voice was certain, absolute. "Want me to touch you, to own you, to show you who you really are underneath all the lies you've been told about yourself." "Yes." The admission was barely a whisper. Dominic's hand moved from Adrian's shoulder to the back of his neck, grip firm, possessive. He pulled Adrian closer until their faces were inches apart. Not yet. His smile was dark, promising. "You're not ready. You think you are, but you're not. When I finally take what you're offering, you're going to give me everything. Complete surrender. And right now, you're still fighting. Still scared." He released Adrian and stood, towering over him. "Get back to work, and do it right this time." Adrian knelt in the dirt, trembling, watching Dominic walk away. The rejection stung, but underneath it was relief and something darker. The certainty that Dominic was right. Adrian wasn't ready. Not for what that man would demand. Not for what giving in would mean about who Adrian really was. The days that followed were torture. Adrian was hyper-aware of every interaction, every look, every casual touch. Dominic seemed to take pleasure in pushing boundaries, finding excuses to put his hands on Adrian, to stand too close, to let his voice drop into intimate registers when giving instructions. And Adrian responded like his body belonged to Dominic instead of himself. Pulse racing when the big man appeared, skin prickling with awareness when he came near, need building until it felt like a living thing inside him, demanding satisfaction. One evening after work, Adrian walked the estate grounds alone, trying to clear his head. He found himself in the formal rose garden, the same beds he'd weeded on his first day. The roses were in full bloom now, their scent heavy on the humid air. He sat on a stone bench, exhausted and confused and aching with wants he couldn't name. He'd been raised to be Richard Whitmore's heir, groomed for boardrooms and power lunches and corporate conquest, taught that control was everything, that showing weakness was failure, that certain desires were shameful and needed to be suppressed. But everything he'd been taught felt like lies when he was around Dominic. The big gardener made him want to surrender control, made him crave being overwhelmed, made him need things his mind said were wrong, but his body knew were right. Footsteps on gravel made Adrian look up. Dominic approached through the garden paths, massive and purposeful. He must have seen Adrian from somewhere on the grounds. Or maybe he'd been watching, waiting for an opportunity. "Can't sleep?" Dominic sat beside him on the bench, his weight making the stone settle slightly. Thinking, dangerous activity. "What about?" Adrian met his eyes. "You, this, whatever this is inevitable." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact. "Has been since the first day. You felt it. I felt it. Only question is when you stop fighting it. What happens if I stop fighting? I show you who you really are. Strip away all the bullshit you've been taught about yourself. Give you what you need even if you can't ask for it yet." Adrian's hands clenched on his knees. "I've never. With a man. With anyone, really." "I know." Dominic's hand covered Adrian's, engulfing it completely. "That's why you're not ready. First time shouldn't be because you're desperate and confused. Should be because you've made a choice. Real choice. not surrender born from exhaustion. I don't know how to make that choice. Don't know what I'm choosing. Then I'll keep waiting. Keep pushing you. Keep showing you pieces of yourself until you can't deny them anymore. And when you finally break, when you finally admit what you need, I'll be there to catch you. His thumb stroked across Adrian's knuckles, a gentle touch from hands capable of such strength. The contrast made Adrian shiver despite the heat. Go back to the house. Get some rest. Tomorrow we're working the North Woods. Hard labor. You'll need your strength. Dominic stood and walked away, leaving Adrian alone in the rose garden, with his racing thoughts and the ghost of that touch burning on his skin. The next morning, they drove to the north edge of the property, where forest gave way to overgrown trails that needed clearing. Dominic handed Adrian an axe and demonstrated how to fell small trees marked for removal, how to limb them, how to cut them into manageable sections. The work was brutal. Each swing of the axe sent shocks through Adrian's shoulders and back. Sweat poured off him despite working shirtless in the shade. But something about the physicality felt good, felt right. Using his body this way, feeling muscles work and strain, pushing past limits. Dominic worked nearby, clearing his own trees with efficiency that made Adrian's efforts look clumsy. But occasionally, he'd stop and watch Adrian, those dark eyes tracking every movement with an intensity that made Adrian's skin prickle with awareness. By lunch, Adrian had cleared 3 trees. His hands were blistered despite gloves, his shoulders screaming. But when Dominic examined his work and nodded approval, the exhaustion felt worth it. They sat on a fallen log to eat, the forest quiet around them except for bird calls and the rustle of leaves. Adrian drank from his water bottle, grateful for shade and a chance to rest. "You're stronger than you think." Dominic's voice broke the comfortable silence. Most rich kids would have quit by now, gone crying to daddy. I thought about it. First week I thought about it every day. Why didn't you? Adrian considered the question. Pride, maybe, not wanting to give my father the satisfaction. But also, he paused, trying to find words. This is the first time I've felt like I'm doing something real, something that matters. Dominic nodded slowly. Physical work does that. Connects you to the world in ways sitting behind a desk never will. You can see what you've accomplished, touch it, know it's real because your body tells you so. Is that why you do this? Instead of something easier? I do this because it's who I am. Dominic met his eyes. I'm not built for offices or computers. I'm built for this, for using my hands, my strength, for creating things and maintaining them. Same as you're built for something other than what your father planned. What am I built for? Dominic's smile was knowing. You'll figure it out, sooner than you think. They returned to work, but Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that they'd been talking about more than just careers. That Dominic had been telling him something important if he could just decode it. The afternoon wore on. Adrian's progress slowed as fatigue set in, but he kept working, kept swinging the axe, kept proving something to himself, if not to Dominic. The sun was starting to descend when he finally dropped the axe and leaned against a tree, chest heaving, completely spent. Dominic appeared beside him, holding out a water bottle. Drink. You're done for the day. Adrian drank gratefully, the cool water easing his parched throat. He could feel Dominic's eyes on him, assessing, calculating. The air between them felt charged again, heavy with unspoken things. You've got sap on your chest. Dominic's hand reached out, thumb brushing across Adrian's sternum. The touch was casual, practical, but it sent electricity racing through Adrian's nervous system. Dominic's hand lingered, spreading across Adrian's chest, dark skin against pale. Adrian couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His heart hammered against Dominic's palm, betraying exactly how affected he was. I can feel your heart racing, Dominic's voice dropped lower. Feel how your body responds to me. You can lie to yourself all you want, but your body knows the truth. Please. Adrian didn't know what he was begging for. More, less, everything. Not yet. Dominic's hand slid up to Adrian's throat, not squeezing, just resting there, claiming space. When I finally take you, you're going to be begging, really begging, and I'm going to make you wait until you understand exactly what you're asking for. He released Adrian and stepped back. Clean up the tools. We're done here. Adrian gathered axes and saws with shaking hands, his body still humming from that touch. The drive back to the equipment barn was silent, but the tension was so thick it felt suffocating. When Dominic finally pulled up to drop Adrian off, he grabbed Adrian's wrist before he could exit the truck. This weekend, you're going to help me at my place. I've got a project that needs 2 sets of hands. Is that allowed? I don't care if it's allowed. I'm telling you to be there. The command in his voice made Adrian's stomach clench with need. Where? Dominic handed him a slip of paper with an address. Saturday morning, 8 sharp. Don't be late. He released Adrian's wrist, and Adrian climbed out of the truck on unsteady legs. He watched Dominic drive away, the paper clutched in his hand like a lifeline or a threat. That night, Adrian lay in bed, unable to sleep, his mind spinning. Going to Dominic's house was crossing a line, made this personal instead of just work. But he knew he'd go, knew he couldn't resist anymore, knew that whatever happened this weekend would change everything. Saturday morning came too quickly. Adrian borrowed one of the estate vehicles and drove to the address Dominic had given him. It was a small house on 5 acres outside of town, surrounded by woods. Nothing fancy, but well-maintained with gardens that showed expert care. Dominic was already outside working on building a deck extension. He looked up when Adrian pulled in, his expression unreadable. You came. You told me to. Dominic's smile was slow, satisfied. Good. That means you're learning. They worked side by side for hours, cutting and fitting boards, using power tools, building something tangible. The work was hard but satisfying, and the relative privacy made their interactions feel different, more intimate, less guarded. Around noon, Dominic called a break. They sat on the partially completed deck, eating sandwiches and drinking cold beer. The woods around them were quiet except for birds and the occasional rustle of leaves. Why did you really ask me here? Adrian's courage came from exhaustion and the strange intimacy of the moment. Because you needed to see this. Dominic gestured at the house, the land. See that I'm not just the help on your father's estate. I have my own place, my own life. I'm not beneath you, and you're not above me. We're just 2 people who want something from each other. What do you want from me? Everything. Dominic set down his beer and turned to face Adrian fully. Your surrender, your trust, your body. I want to strip away every lie you've been told about who you should be and show you who you really are. And what am I? Mine. The word hung in the air between them, absolute and terrifying. Adrian's breath caught in his chest. He should argue, should establish boundaries, should protect himself. But looking into Dominic's dark eyes, seeing the certainty there, feeling his own body respond with heat and need, he couldn't find the will to fight anymore. I don't know how to be that. Dominic's hand came up to cup Adrian's face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone with surprising gentleness. Then I'll teach you, every step, every moment. But you have to choose it, have to say yes, and mean it. Adrian's eyes closed. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like physical force. Saying yes meant admitting things about himself he'd spent years denying, meant surrendering control to a man who would demand everything, meant accepting that he wasn't who his father wanted him to be, who society expected him to be, who he'd tried so hard to pretend he was. But it also meant finally being honest, finally stepping into a truth his body had known all along, even while his mind fought against it, finally becoming real instead of the carefully constructed lie he'd been living. He opened his eyes and met Dominic's steady gaze. "Yes, I choose this. I choose you." Something fierce and possessive blazed in Dominic's eyes. He leaned in slowly, giving Adrian time to pull away if he wanted. But Adrian didn't want to. He'd never wanted anything less than he wanted to retreat from this moment. Their lips met, and Adrian's world tilted on its axis. The kiss was nothing like he'd imagined kisses should be. It was commanding, demanding. Dominic's mouth claiming his with absolute authority. Adrian made a sound low in his throat, something between surrender and relief, and open to the invasion. Dominic's hands framed his face, holding him steady while his tongue explored, tasted, conquered. Adrian's hands came up to grip Dominic's massive shoulders, needing something solid to anchor him, while everything he'd known about himself dissolved. When Dominic finally pulled back, Adrian was breathing hard, his lips swollen and sensitive. The big man's eyes tracked over his face, reading every reaction. Inside. Now. It wasn't a request. Dominic stood and pulled Adrian to his feet with one hand, then led him into the house. The interior was simple, masculine, comfortable, but Adrian barely registered the details before Dominic was pushing him against the wall in the hallway, his massive body caging Adrian in place. Last chance to say no. Dominic's voice was rough with barely restrained need. "Once we start, I'm not stopping until I've had all of you, until you understand completely what belonging to me means. Don't stop." Adrian heard the desperation in his own voice. "Please don't stop." Dominic's mouth crashed into his again, hungrier this time, more demanding. His hands moved to Adrian's shirt, pulling it over his head and tossing it aside. Then his own shirt followed, revealing the landscape of muscle and dark skin that Adrian had been trying not to stare at for weeks. Adrian's hands explored tentatively, tracing the ridges of Dominic's stomach, the broad expanse of his chest. He'd never touched another man like this, never let himself imagine what it would feel like. The reality was overwhelming. All that strength barely leashed. All that power held in check only by Dominic's control. Bedroom. Dominic's hand wrapped around Adrian's wrist, pulling him down the hallway. The room was dominated by a massive bed, the kind that could easily hold Dominic's frame with room to spare. He guided Adrian to stand beside it, then stepped back, eyes roaming over Adrian's bare torso with an intensity that felt like physical touch. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you." Dominic's voice dropped into registers that made Adrian's knees weak. "No hesitation. No arguing. You obey, and I'll give you everything you need. Understand?" "Yes." "Yes what?" "Yes, sir." The honorific felt natural, right? Like something Adrian had been waiting his whole life to say to someone who deserved it. Dominic's expression shifted, satisfaction mixing with that fierce possessiveness. "Good boy. Strip. Show me what's mine." Adrian's hands went to his belt, with fingers that trembled slightly. He'd been naked in front of people before, in locker rooms, at doctor's appointments, but never like this. Never with someone watching him with such hunger, such intent. He pushed his jeans down and stepped out of them, standing in just his underwear. All of it. Adrian hooked his thumbs in the waistband and pushed the last barrier down, stepping free and standing completely exposed. Dominic circled him slowly, taking in every detail, and Adrian felt more vulnerable than he'd ever been in his life. Perfect. Dominic's hand traced down Adrian's spine, making him shiver. "Soft where I'm hard, pale where I'm dark, made to fit against me." His hands settled on Adrian's hips, pulling him back against the solid wall of Dominic's chest. Adrian could feel every inch of the bigger man pressed against him, could feel Dominic's response to having him naked and compliant. "Feel that?" Dominic's voice rumbled against Adrian's ear. "That's what you do to me, what you've been doing to me for weeks. Making me hard every time you bent over in those tight jeans. Every time sweat made your shirt stick to your back. Every time you looked at me like you wanted to drop to your knees but were too scared to admit it." I wasn't scared. The lie came automatically. Dominic's hand moved to Adrian's throat, not squeezing, just holding. "Don't lie to me. You were terrified. Still are. But you're here anyway, because you need this more than you need safety." His other hand slid down Adrian's stomach, lower, wrapping around him with firm pressure. Adrian gasped, his hips jerking forward into that touch. No one had ever touched him there except himself, and Dominic's calloused palm felt nothing like his own hand. So responsive. Dominic worked him with slow, deliberate strokes, going to teach this body to respond only to me. Going to train you so well that just my voice will make you hard. The sensations were overwhelming, too intense, building too fast. Adrian's hands gripped Dominic's forearm, needing something to hold on to while pleasure spiraled through him. Not yet. Dominic's hand stilled. "You don't finish until I give permission. Understand?" Adrian whimpered, his body strung tight with need. "Please." "Please what?" "Please, sir. Please let me." "No." Dominic released him and turned him around, pushing him down to sit on the edge of the bed. "You're going to learn patience. Learn to accept what I give you when I give it to you. Learn that your pleasure exists for me, not for you." He stood over Adrian, massive and commanding, and began unbuckling his own belt. The sound of leather sliding through loops made Adrian's mouth go dry. When Dominic pushed his jeans down, Adrian couldn't help but stare. The man was built proportionally, thick and heavy, and the sight made Adrian's stomach clench, with equal parts anxiety and desperate want. "This is what you're going to take." Dominic fisted himself casually, watching Adrian's reaction. "Going to open you up slow and careful. Going to make sure you're ready. But eventually, you're going to take all of me. Every inch. And you're going to thank me for it." Adrian couldn't form words, could only nod. Dominic's smile was dark and satisfied. "Lay back. Spread your legs." Adrian obeyed, feeling more exposed than he'd ever been. Dominic knelt between his thighs, those massive hands pushing his legs wider, holding them open. Then he was leaning down, his mouth finding Adrian's inner thigh, teeth scraping sensitive skin. The sensation made Adrian arch off the bed, but Dominic's hands held him firmly in place. He worked his way higher, his breath hot against Adrian's skin, building anticipation until Adrian was trembling with need. When Dominic's mouth finally closed around him, Adrian cried out, his hands fisting in the sheets. The wet heat was incredible, overwhelming, nothing like his fumbling experiences alone. Dominic worked him with expertise that came from years of knowing exactly how to take someone apart. But just when Adrian thought he couldn't take any more, when pressure built to the point of breaking, Dominic pulled back. Adrian made a sound of protest that earned him a sharp look. "What did I say about patience?" "Sorry. Sorry, sir." Dominic reached for the nightstand, producing supplies Adrian had been too dazed to notice him gathering. He watched as Dominic coated his fingers, then felt the first touch against places no one had ever touched before. "Breathe." Dominic's free hand pressed against Adrian's stomach. "Just breathe and let me in." The intrusion was strange, uncomfortable at first, but Dominic worked slowly, patiently, adding pressure gradually, while his other hand stroked Adrian back to hardness. And then his fingers found something inside that made stars explode behind Adrian's eyes. "There it is." Dominic's voice was satisfied. "Going to make you feel so good, you forget your own name. He worked that spot methodically, while Adrian came apart beneath him, pleasure building in waves that crashed over him again and again without release. Dominic added another finger, stretching him carefully, and Adrian's body accepted the invasion because it was Dominic's hands, Dominic's will, Dominic's absolute authority making it happen. Ready for me. Dominic withdrew his fingers and Adrian whimpered at the loss. He watched as Dominic prepared himself, then positioned himself at Adrian's entrance. You're going to take this, all of it. And you're going to be perfect for me. The first press of blunt pressure made Adrian tense. Dominic paused, his hand coming up to cup Adrian's face. Look at me. Don't look away. I want to see your eyes when I claim you. Adrian forced himself to meet that intense gaze. Dominic pushed forward slowly, inexorably, and the stretch was intense, almost too much. Adrian's breath came in short gasps, his hands gripping Dominic's shoulders. That's it. Take it. You can handle this. You were made for this. Dominic continued the slow press forward until he was fully seated, and Adrian felt impossibly full, split open, completely possessed. Dominic held still, giving him time to adjust, one hand stroking his face with surprising gentleness. How do you feel? Full, so full. Good, because you're mine now, completely. No going back. He began to move, slow and controlled at first, letting Adrian's body learn the rhythm. Each thrust hit that spot inside that made Adrian see stars. Pleasure building again, overwhelming everything else. Adrian heard himself making sounds he'd never made before, words falling from his lips without conscious thought. Please, Dominic. Please, sir. Need. Please. What do you need? You. Just you. Everything. Dominic's rhythm increased, his control slipping as his own need took over. He drove into Adrian with purpose, with possession, claiming him so thoroughly that Adrian felt it in every cell of his body. This was what he'd been missing, what he'd needed without knowing how to ask for it. Complete surrender to someone strong enough to take it, demand it, own it. Come for me. Dominic's hand wrapped around Adrian again, stroking in time with his thrusts. Show me who you belong to. The permission was all Adrian needed. Pleasure crashed through him in waves so intense he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel. His body clenched around Dominic, and the big man followed him over the edge with a groan that sounded like Adrian's name. They collapsed together, Dominic's weight pressing Adrian into the mattress. Adrian's mind was blissfully blank, every thought scattered by overwhelming sensation. Dominic's hand stroked his hair, his face, gentle touches that grounded him while his body tried to remember how to function. Still with me? Adrian managed a nod. His throat was too tight for words. Dominic withdrew carefully, and Adrian whimpered at the loss. The big man gathered him close, arranging them both on the bed with Adrian tucked against his chest. For a long time they just lay there, breathing together, skin against skin. How do you feel? Different. Adrian's voice was hoarse. Like I finally understand something I've been missing my whole life. What's that? Who I really am. What I need. Adrian tilted his head to meet Dominic's eyes. Thank you. For what? For seeing me. For not letting me hide. Dominic's kiss was gentle this time. Tender. I told you I'd show you who you are. This is just the beginning. We've got a whole summer to explore this, to figure out exactly how deep your need for submission goes. The word should have made Adrian flinch, but it didn't. It felt like truth. They spent the rest of the weekend at Dominic's house. Between working on the deck project, they explored each other with increasing confidence. Dominic taught Adrian his body's capacity for pleasure, pushed boundaries Adrian hadn't known existed, showed him what it meant to truly surrender control to someone who knew exactly what to do with it. By Sunday evening, When Adrian reluctantly prepared to return to his father's estate, he felt like a different person. The frightened, confused boy who'd arrived on Saturday morning had been burned away, replaced by someone who understood his own desires, even if he didn't fully understand how to navigate them yet. Dominic walked him to his car, his hand possessive on the back of Adrian's neck. "Tomorrow, we go back to work. Back to you being the boss's son and me being the head gardener. But you remember what this is, what you are to me, yours." Adrian said it with certainty now. "That's right, mine, and I take care of what's mine." The drive back to the estate felt longer than it should have. Adrian's body ached in new ways, marked by Dominic's possession. Every movement reminded him of what had happened, who he'd surrendered to, how completely he'd been claimed. He snuck into the house through a side entrance, grateful his parents were out at some social function. In his room, he examined himself in the mirror. Bruises darkened on his hips where Dominic's fingers had gripped. His lips were swollen from kisses. His neck showed faint marks where Dominic's teeth had scraped possession into his skin. He should feel shame, should feel horror at what he'd done, what he'd let be done to him. But all he felt was satisfaction and the beginning of addiction. Now that he knew what it felt like to be owned by Dominic Hayes, he couldn't imagine going back to the half-life he'd been living before. Monday morning came too quickly. Adrian showed up at the equipment barn at 7 sharp, his body still tender, his mind spinning with memories of the weekend. Dominic was already there, looking as composed as ever. Only the brief heat in his eyes when he saw Adrian betrayed that anything had changed between them. They worked side by side all day, professional and focused, but the awareness never faded. Every casual touch felt charged. Every quiet command sent heat spiraling through Adrian's core. He'd been conditioned now, his body trained to respond to Dominic's voice, his presence, his slightest gesture of authority. At the end of the day, as the other workers dispersed, Dominic caught Adrian's arm. "Tomorrow night. My place. 8 o'clock. It wasn't a request." Adrian nodded, already anticipating it, already craving the next time Dominic would strip away his defenses and show him new depths of surrender. The pattern continued through June and into July. Days were spent working the estate grounds, Adrian's body growing stronger, more capable. Nights and weekends belonged to Dominic, hours spent at his house learning what it meant to be owned completely. Dominic pushed Adrian's boundaries methodically, introducing him to new sensations, new positions, new ways to experience pleasure through submission. Adrian learned that Dominic's dominance wasn't just about physical acts. It was psychological, emotional, a complete claiming that left no part of Adrian untouched. But Dominic also showed unexpected gentleness. He'd cook for Adrian, feed him carefully, make sure he had everything he needed. He'd hold him for hours after intense sessions, his massive arms protective and tender. He'd talk about his life, his dreams, treating Adrian like more than just a body to use. And slowly, Adrian realized it wasn't just dominance and submission. It was deeper than that. It was love expressed in the only language Dominic knew. Possession as devotion, control as care, demanding everything because he valued it completely. One evening in mid-July, Adrian's father summoned him to the study. Richard Whitmore sat behind his desk, the same position as their last conversation, but his expression was different, calculating rather than disappointed. "Morrison tells me you've been working well. No complaints, no issues. I've been trying to prove I can work hard." His father studied him for a long moment. "You look different, stronger, more focused. The summer has been good for you." "Yes, sir. It has. I spoke with Harvard. They're willing to take you back in the fall if you've demonstrated maturity and commitment. You'll start with a clean slate." The words should have brought relief. a chance to redeem himself, to get back on track for the life his father had planned. But all Adrian felt was cold dread. Going back to Harvard meant leaving Dominic, meant returning to a world where he'd have to hide who he really was, suppress the needs he'd finally learned to acknowledge. "I'll think about it." His father's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a negotiation. You're going back to school. This manual labor was meant to teach you a lesson, not become a permanent arrangement." Adrian stood, his hands clenched at his sides. "You're right. It did teach me a lesson, but not the one you intended. I learned that I don't want your life. Don't want to sit in boardrooms and make money for shareholders. I want to do something real, something that matters. Don't be ridiculous. You're a Whitmore. You have responsibilities. To who? You. A legacy I never asked for? A company I don't care about?" Richard's face flushed with anger. "You're throwing away your future because of what? Some romantic notion about manual labor? You think working as a gardener is a sustainable life for someone with your advantages? I think being happy is more important than being successful by your definition. Happiness is irrelevant. What matters is duty, legacy, maintaining what I've built. Then find another heir." Adrian turned toward the door. "I'm done trying to be someone I'm not. If you walk away from this opportunity, I'll cut you off completely. No trust fund, no safety net, nothing." Adrian paused at the door, looking back at his father. "Then I guess I'll have to learn to live without it." He walked out before his father could respond, his heart racing but his mind clear. He'd made his choice. Not the safe one, not the one that made sense by conventional standards, but the one that was honest. He drove straight to Dominic's house, not caring that it was unscheduled, not caring about anything, except getting to the one person who understood him. Dominic answered the door in jeans and a t-shirt, surprise flickering across his face when he saw Adrian's expression. "What happened?" "I told my father no. About Harvard, about the company, about everything. I chose this, chose you." Dominic pulled him inside and into his arms. "What did he say? That he'd cut me off financially, that I'm throwing away my future, and you came here anyway. I came here because this is the only future I want." Adrian pulled back enough to meet Dominic's eyes. "I love you. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it's been since the beginning. But I love you, and I can't go back to pretending I don't." Dominic's hands framed his face, thumbs stroking across his cheekbones. "I love you too. Have since before you knew what you needed. Since I watched you wandering around your father's estate looking lost and scared. Knew then I wanted to be the one to find you." Their kiss was different this time. Not dominance and submission, though that would always be part of them, but partnership, devotion, the kind of love that transcended roles and power dynamics into something deeper. "What happens now?" Adrian asked when they finally pulled apart. "Now we figure it out together." Dominic led him to the couch, pulling him down to sit beside him. "I've been saving money for years. Have enough to buy land, start my own landscaping company. Been waiting for the right time, the right reason. This is both. I can help. I've got some money saved, skills I've learned this summer. We'll build something together." Dominic's arm wrapped around Adrian's shoulders. "Won't be easy. Your father won't make this simple. Society won't understand what we are to each other. But if you're willing to work for it, to fight for it, we can make this real. I've never wanted anything more." They spent that night planning. Real plans. Concrete steps toward a future they'd build together. Dominic would put in his notice at the estate. They'd find land, start the business, create something that was theirs. Adrian would work alongside him, learning the business side, handling clients, proving his worth through effort instead of legacy. It wouldn't be glamorous, Wouldn't be the life Richard Whitmore had envisioned for his son, but it would be honest, real, built on love and trust and the kind of partnership that came from truly knowing each other. 2 weeks later, Adrian moved his belongings out of the estate. His father refused to see him, but his mother met him in the foyer. Her expression was pained but not surprised. "I won't pretend to understand this, but you're my son. If you need anything..." "I'll be okay, Mom. Better than okay." She touched his cheek briefly. "You do look happier than I've seen you in years. That counts for something." It was more blessing than Adrian had expected. He loaded his few possessions into Dominic's truck and drove away from the estate without looking back. That chapter of his life was over. A new one was beginning. They found land outside of town, 10 acres with good soil and access to water. Spent their savings on equipment, supplies, permits. Dominic's reputation brought clients, and Adrian's unexpected talent for communication and organization kept them running efficiently. Within 6 months, they were profitable. Within a year, they were thriving. The work was hard, the hours long, the challenges constant. But Adrian had never been happier. He woke up each morning next to the man he loved, spent his days building something real, fell into bed each night exhausted and satisfied. Dominic never stopped being dominant, never stopped demanding Adrian's submission. But it evolved, deepened, became something more nuanced than simple control. It was the foundation of their relationship, the language they used to express love that couldn't be spoken in conventional ways. And Adrian never stopped surrendering, never stopped finding freedom and giving up control to someone who valued it completely, never stopped needing Dominic's strength, his certainty, his absolute authority. 2 years after leaving his father's estate, they stood together on their land, surveying the business they'd built. Greenhouses dotted the property, equipment shed full of tools, a client list that stretched across 3 counties, and the house they'd renovated together, making it truly theirs. Any regrets? Dominic's arm wrapped around Adrian's shoulders. Not even one. "Your father tried to contact me last week. Wanted to know if you were okay. What did you tell him? That his son is exactly where he belongs. That he's happy, successful, building something that matters. And that he doesn't need saving." Dominic turned Adrian to face him, his hands settling on familiar places. "Mine. Yours." Adrian smiled. "Always yours." "Good, because I'm never letting go." Their kiss was interrupted by the arrival of a client's car. They pulled apart reluctantly, shifting into professional mode. But the awareness never faded. The connection never weakened. It was always there between them, solid and certain and real. That evening, after the work was done and the client satisfied, they stood on their deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Dominic pulled Adrian back against his chest, his arms wrapping around him possessively. "Remember that first day when you showed up at the estate looking terrified?" "I was terrified. Didn't know what I was walking into. You walked into your future. Just took you a while to realize it." Adrian leaned into the solid warmth of Dominic's body. "Best decision I ever made, coming back home that summer. It wasn't a decision. It was fate. You were always meant to be mine. Just needed the right circumstances to make you see it." Adrian turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd changed everything. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For claiming me. For showing me who I really am." Dominic's smile was tender and possessive all at once. "I didn't ask. I told you. That's what I do. Tell you what you need, even when you're too scared to ask for it. And you obey because that's who you are." "Yes, sir. Good boy." They went inside as darkness fell, leaving the world behind. Inside their home, built with their own hands, they existed in the space they'd created, where Dominic's dominance and Adrian's submission weren't shameful or wrong, but the foundation of a love deeper than either had known was possible. Years would pass. The business would grow. Their relationship would deepen. Challenges would come and be overcome. But the core truth remained unchanged. Adrian belonged to Dominic completely, and Dominic cherished that gift with every fiber of his being. On their 5th anniversary, Dominic presented Adrian with a leather cuff, custom-made, with an inscription on the inside, "Property of Dominic Hayes." Adrian wore it every day, a visible symbol of invisible bonds. And when people asked about their relationship, about how they made it work, Adrian would simply say that he'd found someone who loved him enough to demand everything, and he'd found the courage to give it. That submission wasn't weakness, but strength. That surrender wasn't loss, but freedom. Dominic had promised to show Adrian who he really was, and he'd kept that promise, stripping away every lie, every pretense, every false identity, until only truth remained. Adrian was his, completely, eternally, joyfully, and that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The rose garden where it all began still bloomed each summer, though now Adrian tended it as part of his own business, rather than his father's estate. Occasionally he'd kneel in the same dirt where Dominic had first commanded his surrender, and he'd remember that transformative moment, the moment when his knees had hit the ground and his life had finally begun. Some people never found what they needed, never discovered who they really were beneath the expectations and lies. Adrian had been lucky, desperate enough to accept help from an unlikely source, brave enough to admit his needs, strong enough to surrender control to someone who would never abuse it. Dominic had seen him completely, claimed him absolutely, and loved him unconditionally. And Adrian had given him everything in return, finding in that exchange a completeness he'd never imagined possible. As the sun set on another day, on another year, on a life built from honesty and need and love, Adrian knelt before the man who owned him, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because this was who he was, who he'd always been, finally free to exist without shame. Dominic's hand settled on the back of his neck, familiar, possessive, home, good boy, mine, yours, always yours. And in that moment, in that truth, Adrian found peace. The journey from his father's disappointed son to Dominic's devoted partner had been painful, terrifying, overwhelming, but every moment of struggle had been worth it to arrive here. Kneeling in his own garden, owned by a man who loved him enough to demand his complete surrender, finally understanding that being claimed wasn't imprisonment, but the truest form of freedom he'd ever known.